beginning of this story takes place in Vietnam, the start of it in 1970, Christmas of 1970, and extends up to Christmas of this year. And it's a story about prayers answered in the most uncommon, unlikely way. I was a young sailor, I was on board USS Ranger. We were doing combat operations off the coast of Vietnam. And that's where we were operating on Christmas, because I guess they figured with us being Christians, we wouldn't bomb them on Christmas Eve. So anyhow, Christmas Eve that year, we spent bombing North Vietnamese. And of course, that 20-year-old single was no big deal. Been away, it was, a little leery about being away from home. Didn't realize the impact it's having on my folks back home. Anyhow, fast forward, so that's where I spent the Christmas of 1970. So fast forward to 71, we had our first child. Well, it so happened in Christmas of 1972, I was in Vietnam again, had a daughter at home, totally different outlook on what war was and what we were doing. And of course, at that time, it was the height of anti-war, anti-Vietnam. So I spent the Christmas again in 1972 off the coast of Vietnam, and us bombing and attacking military targets. And of course, I had a whole different attitude on what was going on, because now I'm a father, a husband, and I was really, really missing people back home. Fast forward to March 73, and the war was winding down, so I was transferred home. And of course, at that time when it was transferring home, there was thousands and thousands of military guys being discharged and just told, go home. We weren't given any kind of readaptation facilities, anything. We were just told, take your uniform off and go home. Don't wear your uniform in public. It embarrasses people. It upsets them. So that's how we came home in 73, thousands of us. Of course, I was still in the Navy. So I spend that time wondering what the heck we were doing. And then in 75, I watched the fall of Saigon. And it hit me really hard, just like it did thousands of other veterans, Vietnam veterans, realizing that we had lost a country. We had lost a war. So we all kind of went into seclusion. You didn't hear a whole lot said about Vietnam veterans back in the earlier days until recently. So we all just submerged ourselves into our activities, family, work, this and that. Kind of withdrew from society. But in the process of the last, now this was 1973 that I left there, and if you look at the math, that was 50 years ago. Now in that 50 years, I had my ins and outs, ups and downs with God. But the last 40 years or so, I've had this prayer to God that relieves some of the pain. Take some of this internal pain away, if you will. And hadn't thought much about that, because it's kind of a silent prayer, and I think a lot of combat veterans have the same prayer. So fast forward to about 3 weeks ago. I just recently had knee replacement surgery, which was very painful. I don't care what some of the other people say. It was very painful. So I was going through therapy one day, and I had asked, God in a nonchalant way, ease this pain a little bit if you can, give me some relief. I was going through therapy, and I looked across the room. I'm on one bed or one mat doing my exercise, and I looked across the room and I saw this Vietnamese gentleman, pretty much the same age as me. I thought, wow. And we kind of just looked at each other. For the hour that we were both there, we looked at each other. And it was kind of like two 19-year-olds looking at each other across the room. Well, after we finished our therapy, we both got up and we walked toward each other and we spoke. And he asked me when I had been in Vietnam, and I told him. And I asked him, I said, well, when did you leave Vietnam? In '75 when Saigon fell? And he said, yes, that's when I left. I looked at him, my eyes teared up, his teared up. And I looked at him, I says, I want to apologize to you. He said, for what? I said, I'm sorry we lost your country. I'm sorry we failed you. And he looked at me and he says, nah, don't worry about that. He said, I'm just glad to meet you. And at that time, I don't know how to explain it unless you've been there and you felt it. There was this weight that lifted, not off my shoulders, but off my heart, that said, it was meant for the two of us to meet each other, and for a moment in our life, we were 19-year-old again, and we were comrades again, and it felt so rewarding, and just, I can't explain it to the extent other than the fact that I was asking for relief from a pain I thought that I incurred on November the 3rd when I had knee surgery, when in reality, God freed me of a pain that's been on my heart for 50 years. And I just pray that everyone that thinks your prayers will never be answered, they will be in due time, my friend, in due time, and at God's will, not mine, not yours, but God's.